I'm going to let you know that we started this sermon series a few weeks ago called Trending, and 2 weeks ago was Mother's Day, and so we were trending that it was Mother's Day and hashtag Mother's Day, right? And then last week it was graduation, so it was hashtag graduation, and congratulations for all of our seniors. And then we get to what does birthday have to do with May, right? Well, just to let you know, we were planning who was going to preach throughout the summer about 3 months ago, and somewhere I got into my mind that it was going to be a really good idea for me to preach on my birthday. So you don't need to tell me happy birthday, just leave it at that. Today is my 39th birthday. So, birthdays, yeah, right? And it's my first 39th birthday, to be clear. Now, birthdays are a time of like reflecting, looking back at the past and looking forward to the future. And so when we were talking about, well, what can we preach about that's, hashtag birthday? And Craig says, I know, you could come up with 39 things that you've learned in 39 years, and you should spend at least 2 to 3 minutes on each one of them. And I said, no, I want people to wish me a happy birthday, not wish that this is my last birthday, right? But I am. I'm 39 years old, and I'm cresting the hill. So before I hit that peak and start rolling down on the other side, I did think, it's a good idea for us every once in a while. Birthdays are a good day for us to look back on where we've been and how our life has been and different things like that. And so rather than just a random 39 things that I've learned in my life, I thought, I wonder if I can look back on how the church has lived up to being the church in my life. What kinds of things that I've caught on to and recognized, and how the people that I've encountered in the church have lived up to those things. In the passage that Jen read just a few minutes ago, Paul writes, I try to be all things to all people, so that somehow I might be able to save some. And I don't think that or presume that I or any one of you individually can be all things to all people. But I can tell you that, not that I have a personality disorder or anything, but as I've grown up in my life, I have found that wherever I am and whoever I am in that moment, that I've always been able to find people who have connected with me and have reached out to me and helped me to see who God is in the church. And so I thought maybe if I could share some of the experiences and the ways that I've seen God at work through the people of the church, then maybe you might be able to connect to ways that you've seen that as well. And as I'll reiterate again, then at the end of the day, how we can take the ways that we've seen people live out what the church means to us and turn it around. And maybe collectively we can become all things to all people. I could just pray and end right here if you want, but I want to tell some stories today. Hopefully my experiences resonate with you. Maybe they do, or maybe just as I share some experiences, you pick up on some things and you make some connections for your own life in different ways. But I want to start from, I want to begin with my experiences when I was just a little kid. We've all been that little kid, right? When I was 6 years old, a week or two, right after I turned 6, yes, a week after I turned 6, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska from Waverly, Iowa. So we moved from this small town of like 8,000 people to a metropolitan area of, I don't know, what was 650,000, 700,000 people combined at the time. Omaha was this massive place. And I finished kindergarten a couple of days before we loaded up into the truck and came and moved into our new house. And lo and behold, the first thing I learned is that Omaha does school differently. School ends in Iowa, and kids in Omaha are still in school past Memorial Day. So we moved to Omaha, and I still got to, my parents said, well, Chad needs to meet some friends, so let's enroll him in school again and make him finish kindergarten a second time. But I remember for the longest time we had this placemat that I made that year in kindergarten, and one of the things it said was, love is making new friends but keeping the old. And so when I look back on that, I don't know that I totally remember all of that transition experience, but I can remember from the things that I've written that when we're kids, some of the things that we need to know are, am I loved? Am I noticed? And when we moved to Omaha, I know that from later conversations with my parents, that one of the biggest things that they wanted to do was they wanted to find a church where our entire family enjoyed going to church and being a part of things. They wanted to find a place where together we could worship and we all fit in. And isn't that something that we kind of all desire, that am I noticed? Do I fit in somewhere? Do I have a place? And at our church, there was this guy, and his name was Rick Bonas. Does anybody know who Rick Bonas is? Other than my parents, because they went to that church, okay? Rick Bonas was a former All-American linebacker for the University of Nebraska, spent some time in the NFL with the Raiders and with the Buccaneers. And my dad tells this story probably better than I do, but there was one Sunday morning that my parents, or my dad and Rick, were talking, and I came up after I got out of Sunday school, and I was running around in the commons area like we see so many kids do. And my guess is I was probably vying for my dad's attention at that point in time. And my dad paused and said, "Hey, Chad, I want to introduce you to this guy, Rick." And, the story isn't just about me getting to meet Rick, but it's about the way that Rick responded when my dad introduced me to him. Because the thing that my dad says, and I'll tell you I remember, but it's probably because my dad has told the story so many times, is that what happened is that Rick said, "Hi, Chad, it's nice to meet you." But Rick didn't just stand there and look down on me from his 6'3" frame to this 6-year-old boy. Rick got down on a knee, and he stuck his hand out and he said, "Hi, Chad, I'm Rick. It's nice to meet you." Rick got on my level, put his eyes where mine were, and with his body motion, with the way that he handled himself, and with the way that he introduced himself, he made it abundantly clear to me and to my dad at the time that I was noticed, that I mattered, that I wasn't just a nuisance, but that there was something important about me. And my dad tells that story still. In fact, last fall, my dad calls me up and he says, "Hey, you want to go to the Big Red Breakfast this morning?" And I'm like, later this week. And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds fun. I'll go." Opportunity to go have breakfast with my dad and hang out. And we get in the car. He picks me up, and we get in the car, and we're on the way. He goes, did you do anything? Did you look at who's talking today? I'm like, "No." And he goes, "Okay." And we walk in, and Rick was the speaker that morning. And we went up to say hi to Rick, and we chatted for a few minutes, and my dad said, "You remember Chad? This is my son." And Rick was like, "Yeah, you've grown up," and all this kind of stuff. But then my dad went back, and he let Rick know. He said, "Rick, I still remember 30-something years later what you did for Chad. I still remember that the impact that not only did you have on my son, but that you had on me because of that." You see, in Mark chapter 10, Jesus is talking, and the disciples kind of shoo away the kids, right? And Jesus says, "No, let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to those who are like these children. I tell you the truth, anybody who doesn't receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And so he took the children in his arms, and he placed his hands on their heads, and he blessed them. Whether it's a child or whether it's just somebody walking in the door, when we tell somebody that they're noticed, it matters. We take them and we simply love them into God's kingdom. We are following the example that Jesus gave us to say, this is our job, to let everybody come in and to let them know that we see them. I look at Caleb and Berkeley, and one of my things that I've started to do is when they try to get my attention, or when they say, "Daddy, watch me, watch me, watch me," the thing that I try to tell them is that I see you. I recognize you. How great is it if we can all walk in the doors of a church, or we can all have people in our lives who recognize us and notice us and pay attention to us. A few years later, I find myself in middle school. We all remember those awkward, weird middle school years where you know your shoes don't quite fit right. You're outgrowing your shoes faster than your parents can buy them, but you can't remember your locker combination, right? Walking through the middle school, just trying to figure all that out. Well, we had our church. We had a pretty decent sized youth group. There were a lot of middle school kids there, and just like here at the Water's Edge, we had volunteers that helped out. I was Facebooking with my youth pastor from way back then the other day, and because I couldn't remember the names of the guys, that's my own fault. But there were these two guys, and I remember them distinctly because they were there every single week. Dave Martins and Steve Countryman. They're still around in Omaha, but every single week I would walk in the door, and they would ask me, "How are you doing?" And they show interest in things that I was interested in as a middle schooler, even if they didn't have any interest or didn't care about it themselves. They cared about me, and so they asked, "How are you doing?" And it was great having them around, and ask those questions. But the thing that I remember the most is that they were just there every single week. Today, I look back on them being there, and that's even more amazing to me because I've been through, they were probably in their late 20s, early 30s at the time. I don't think either one of them were married, and I don't know if they were there because they thought one of the other volunteers was cute or what, but here's what I know is that they were there every single week. They could have been doing all kinds of other things on their Wednesday evenings at youth group other than hanging out with a bunch of prepubescent middle school boys. And yet they chose to show up. Presence matters. It's amazing the amount of respect that somebody can earn and the impact that they can have when they simply keep showing up and being there every single week. I see that in our church. I see that in some of our college-age guys like Jordan and Sean and Evan and Zach. I see that in some of our adult leaders and other volunteers like Stacy. And I see people who just keep showing up in the lives of our kids. But, I think and I hope that in the same way, we keep showing up in the lives of one another here as well. I get to middle or high school. I survived middle school. I survived junior high, and barely. But Darren, I was telling you about, he was my youth director at my church, and when you get to high school, we start to have to ask those questions like, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go to college? Do I matter? How do I navigate all of this? Darren was probably the first person that I ever had in my life that started to speak to me and tell me, and not so, just plainly say, like, I can see that you have some abilities and that you could do well. Like, maybe you could do ministry. Maybe you could be a youth pastor someday. This is something that I see in you. He showed me that I could make a difference, and during my sophomore year, after I'd been out of the middle school, we called it junior high at the time, after I'd been out of the junior high youth group for a year, I got into my sophomore year. He said, "Chad, why don't you can you come help out? Can you help with games and help lead some of the small groups and the discussion groups and all that kind of stuff?" And wow, do you know what it meant to be invited to have a leadership role in the church? And that summer, after my sophomore year, he called me up and he said, "Hey, we're going to go to this camp called Leadership Quest in northern Minnesota. Do you want to go?" I didn't know anything about it, but I said, "Okay." And really what he said in that moment and at that camp, the things that I picked up on and the conversations that I had with Darren during my sophomore and junior year was that he saw potential in me and he had confidence in me as he invited me to be a leader with our middle school and to consider, is this something that you can do with your life? Paul, as we read about in the scripture, as the guy that we read from earlier, had this young protege, this young man that he picked up along the way, along his travels. See, he would go around and he would preach in a town and help start a church there, and then he would go on somewhere else and do it again, and he just kind of did this traveling thing. And somewhere along the way, he picked up this young teenage boy named Timothy. His mom said, I want you to help with my son. He's got some potential, but can you take him under your wing and help him out? We don't know if he traveled with him for 6 months or for a year or for a couple of years, but we know that somewhere along the way, Paul trusted this young man, this teenage guy, to lead a church in a city. And we know that because he writes this letter to him in 1 Timothy, and in it he says, I have confidence in you. Okay, this is basically what he says. He says, don't let anybody think less of you because you're young. Your age has nothing to do with anything, essentially is what he's saying. He says, your job is to be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, and in your love, your faith, and your purity. For a high school kid who's going through puberty, who's trying to figure out life and trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life, to have somebody invite me to be a part of something, say, come along, let's try this, and to demonstrate confidence in me, man, that mattered. Sometimes we need to hear that, right? Sometimes we need to hear, you can do this. Sometimes we need to hear, come be a part of this with me. I see this in you. Maybe, and my hope is that maybe you've picked that up since you've been here at the Water's Edge or somewhere along your life as well. That invitation to come along and join in the ride and be a part of what's going on, man, that matters. So a few years later, I find myself in college, and I did the thing that I always said that I would never do. I stayed at UNO for a couple of years. That wasn't the thing that I said I would never do. After 2 years at UNO, I packed up and I went back to Waverly, Iowa. I went and I attended the same college that my parents graduated from. I had some of the same people in my life that they had in their lives when they were in college, even a couple of the same professors. But you know, one thing that really maybe I struggled with, and I think probably a lot of college kids struggle with, or maybe we all find, is that there's so times in our lives where we just kind of start to feel ourselves getting distanced from the church. Where I didn't know if I fit into a church. A couple of times I had tried to go to churches in town, and I would walk into this town of 8,000 people, a church in that town, and I'd look around and I didn't see anybody there that I connected with. And so I struggled. I struggled to make real faith-based connections with other people, and it was also a time where I struggled personally. I made some mistakes, the kind that you read about in the newspaper, the kind that kind of hang with you and follow you around for a while. And then all of a sudden, my senior year, I said, "Gosh, you know, I really gotta figure something out. I looked like I was going to be sticking around for a couple of years, and so I went and I walked into this church, and it was a small little Baptist church, maybe 90 to 100 people that attended on Sunday mornings. It was a general Baptist congregation, and it was right on the golf course, which made it a little bit more attractive to me. You know, when I walked in the door, the thing that I was looking for was acceptance. The thing that I was looking for was, is this going to be a church that has a place for me? And I walked in the door and I met the pastor, and I walked in, and over on the side there were like 10 college students that I knew. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, there's people that I know here. There's familiar faces. How did they keep this church a secret for so long? Maybe there's something about this. And I got invited right away to be a part of their small group. I had the pastor that invited me over for dinner. I had another family in the church that said, "Hey, can you help out with the youth group? And can you be a part of this?" And you know, despite all the things that I was dealing with, and even some of the things that happened while I was a part of that church, the thing that I kept being told over and over and over was, "You're okay. You're accepted here. You're a part of what we have going on, and we want you to keep being a part of that." Despite everything, I felt welcomed and accepted. And when I went through the struggles that I went through, I can say that that they were there to lift me back up and help me start fresh. You see, acceptance matters, and through acceptance, God can take that brokenness and the struggles and the things that we deal with, and he can help to make us new. In Revelation 21, John, the writer of that book, says, I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever. And then it says, the one that was sitting on the throne says, look, I am making everything new. Write this down, for what I tell you is trustworthy and true. We have people probably every week that walk through our doors and are looking for acceptance. They're looking to know if we can pick them up right where they are and help them to move forward, leaving whatever we had previously behind, and just let them be who God wants them to be, and us show them who God desires for us. And my hope is that we can see that acceptance matters. I experienced that, and my hope is maybe also that you've experienced that as well. So I bounced around. After college, I worked for a whole 8 months at a church in Minnesota, and then I moved and went down to Oklahoma for 4 years. And towards the end of those 4 years, I met this girl named Kim. And we started dating in February, a week after her birthday, so I didn't have to buy birthday presents or Valentine's presents. And about 2.5 months later, we were engaged. And somewhere in the midst of that, a friend of mine, I was talking to a friend of mine and that attends here, and I had said, I met this girl, this is the one, it's all going to work out, this is it. And she says, good, you should marry her and you should move up to Omaha and be the youth director at our church. And I'm like, huh? And she's like, yeah, our church is looking for a youth director. I go, really? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, we also, where I attended growing up. And I said, yeah. And she says, well, we also started this really cool thing called the Water's Edge, and we meet at a middle school, and we're getting ready to move to the high school, and I think it's going to be a really cool thing, and you should apply for the job. And so I did. And so in August, February to August, okay, in August, we got married. We went on our honeymoon. We came back from our honeymoon. We packed up a truck, and we drove to Omaha, and I started September 1st at Faith Westwood United Methodist Church, and I was introduced there. And the next week, I was introduced here, and everything happened so fast. And whether or not, every guy will tell you, whether or not it happened in 6 months or 6 years, it all happened really fast, right? And all of a sudden, you're standing there and you're saying, will you? I will. Do you? I do. I promise this. I promise that. And you turn and the pastor says, I introduce to you Mr. and Mrs. Chad Schuckman. And the guy says, oh my gosh, what did I just do? What have I got myself into? I now have somebody that I'm supposed to be responsible for, and I don't even know if I can take care of myself. And I proved it by losing my wife in Mexico on our honeymoon. It was her fault. And then I moved her away from Oklahoma and her mom and her family, and I brought her to Nebraska, and she's a Sooner fan. And I'm like, oh my gosh, half the time I'm sitting here, I'm like, do I really even know what it takes to be a husband? And I mean, I've watched my dad, and that's nice, but come on, can I really do this? And guess what? Like, we started coming to the Water's Edge in Faith Westwood, and we met some great people. People that I look up to, and that I sit there and I see the way that they are husbands to their wives, and the way that they care for their families, and like guys like Steve Gibson, and guys like Chuck Peters, and at Faith Westwood there's a guy that I just really connected with. His name was Greg Stolp. And you know some of these people, and I sat there and I was like, if this is what being a good husband is, that's what I want to be like. And so I've tried to pick up on cues and things that I see them do, and I don't always do it perfectly, but what I see is that there are people that kind of, whether they did it on purpose or not, they showed me how to be a husband. And we joined a small group, or we actually started a small group that's now been together, the bulk of us, for about 9 years almost now. And over the past 9 years, others have gotten married and or engaged and been a part of our group, and some have left and some have gone. But you know, like, we have watched our kids get. We didn't watch our kids. We have watched them start families and get older, and now some of them are in elementary school or starting elementary school, and we've been there for each other, and we've done a lot of life together. If you're in a small group, maybe you know what that means, what that's like. You see, connection matters. In the church, we are doing life together. And in our small group, we go through that and we experience things and we learn together. We learn from each other. We grow together. We pray for each other. We help each other. Doing life together is a lot more fun than trying to figure it out on our own, right? In Acts chapter 2, the Bible talks about how the church came together in its infancy. And it said all of the believers, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper and even to prayer. Kind of sounds like a small group, right? A deep sense of awe came over them. The apostles performed many miraculous signs. That happens in our small group a lot, by the way, and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place, and they shared everything that they had. They sold their property and possessions. They shared the money with other people in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, but then they met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and they shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. You know, as I've gone through and been a part of my small group, and as Kim and I have grown in our marriage, we've had some great people to lead the way and even just to figure it out as we go along as well. And I'm so thankful and grateful for that. If you've been a part of a small group, maybe you can connect with some of those things as well. Maybe you can connect with this one too, as parenthood. Holy cow. If I wasn't sure what to do when I got married, I certainly wasn't sure what to do with a kid who depended on me for his very life. Right? My son's born, they hand him to me, they say, "Here you go, take him home." What? You mean we have to figure this out? We've got to do that? Can I do this? In Hebrews chapter 13, it says, "Remember your leaders, those who taught you the word of God. Think of all the good that has come from their lives and follow the example of their faith." Okay, I can do that. I can follow in somebody else's footsteps. And we've had, you know, maybe it's just my luck that I'm the youth director and I get to see parents be parents to kids. And sometimes when before you have kids, you think that you can tell every parent how to be a better parent than they actually are. And then you realize when you are a parent that they're the most awesome parents in the world and you're not, right? So I've watched people and I've learned from them and I've got these great witnesses and examples who I've seen. You know, I look at like the Manthys who have 4 kids and how they do that, and I've looked at the Ellerts who have 5 kids and I think, well, if they can do 5, I can handle 2. And I see that the Manthys and the Ellerts, one of the things that I love about both of those families and that I've learned from them is like they are unconditionally supportive, present, and active in their kids' lives. And then I think, I hope I can do that too. And I think about how I want Caleb to grow up to be a godly young man. And I'm grateful for some of the dads that I've been able to witness in this church and how they've parented their sons. And Craig is one of them. I watch the way that he just adores Benjamin and David. I've seen other great men in our church like Tim Carmody and Rod Welsh, and I see the young men that their sons are becoming, like Sean and Evan. And I've tried to instill some of the qualities in Caleb that I've seen in the interactions that Tim and Rod have with their sons, how they demonstrate just utter love for their boys and patience and trust, and how they encourage them and push them. And I admire, because I so admire the young men that their boys have become, I want to find out what it is that they've done as dads to help that happen. And then I now have a 2-year-old little girl, and I don't know what to do with a girl. I'm not one. Okay? I sit there and I see people like Stacy Dobesh and Jen Peters, and I see how they encourage their daughters and how they love on them and how they raise them. And I sit there and I think, if my daughter grows up to be as amazing as some of the girls that are a part of our youth group and who have come out of our youth group, then somewhere along the way we've done something right. But it's not because of me, it's because there's other people that have been this example for us. And these aren't the only people that do this in our church, okay? There are so many living examples of parents and spouses and grandparents and people who have come alongside Kim and I, whether, like I said, some of them intentionally, some of them completely unintentionally, that have helped us to see the kind of marriage that we want to have, the kind of people that we want to be, the kind of parents that we want to be. And maybe that's a bit of what the church is supposed to be, right? We do life together. We learn from each other. We grow together. So today I'm 39 years old. And as I look back at my life and I think about what I have coming forward, both in and out of the church, I find myself right here. And I decide to ask myself a couple of questions. And I come to a couple of realizations along the way, and that helps me to set some goals going forward. The first question that I asked, and this is what you heard me talk about today, is, what has the church been for me? When I was a kid, it saw me. It recognized me. It told me that I see you. When I was in middle school, it said, you know, you matter because we care about you and we show up. And presence in my life was another thing that the church was. It spoke the future and it spoke direction into my heart, and that was also a person in the church, and it accepted me, and it's taught me, and it's led me. I'm blessed. I look at all these things and I realize I am blessed. I'm blessed to be a part of this church. I'm blessed to have the church in all of its different functions. I'm a denominational mutt. It's not about what denomination or church you particularly attend. It's does the church do what the church is designed to do? And I've been blessed to have the church do that for me. I've had great people in my life. I've been a part of great churches throughout my life, and I'm blessed to have 39 years to look back on and see how God has been and is currently at work in my life in and through His church. And I'm thankful for that. And so then the next question, and maybe the goal that I have to set for myself is this, is like, if the church has been all these different things to me, right? If the church has filled so many different functions and needs in my life, then how can I turn around and be a blessing? How can I be the church or set Jesus' example for everybody else that I meet? How can I show the compassion that I've seen? How can I feel for others and meet them and then meet them at and speak to their point of need? How can I take everything that's been given to me and be generous in giving that back to those that I encounter? And maybe that's the question that I want to ask you, those same two questions. As you've been a part of the Water's Edge, as you've grown up as you've been a part of the church throughout the years, as you've had pastors and friends and family members and all these other people in your life, what has the church been to you? How has God made himself present and known in your life through the church, and more particularly through the people in it? And since the church is made of God's people, then the question is back, then how are we going to be the church to others? You see, Paul said, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. Other translation says, I am all things to all people. Well, maybe you can't be all things to all people, but that's why there's a we. That's why we're the church, is so that somewhere, hopefully, for every single new person, every single visitor, every single guest that walks through the doors of our church, and even for every single one of you here, that there's somebody else here in the church that can be what you need them to be. And then we can turn that around and we can be whatever it is that God's calling us to for others. We may not be able to be all things to all people, but maybe each of us can be something to someone, so that together as a church we can reach one person and help them, or we can each reach someone and we can help them discover and call the church their home, and that they can find a place in it. Would you guys pray with me this morning?